Alright, my darlings, so a new Ducktales series has now come and gone, and quite frankly, it was awesome, and to me should be the new golden standard on how you remake or reboot a TV series. However, there are still plenty of changes that are between this and the original series, and even more so if you go back to the original comics where it all started. So why don't we take a brief moment to have a look at these changes between the new, the old, and the original. First and foremost, this isn't an old versus new video about which series is better. They're both great and deserve to be watched in their own right. This is just a video examining on how the two differ, but are still one and the same in terms of a franchise. Also, this video will include spoilers all the way up until the final episode, so be warned, after this there's no turning back. Unless you suffer a blow to the head and forget about it all. Okay then, let's go! Huey, Dewey and Louie are basically the same kid repeated 3 times in the original, much like they were in the comics and the old Donald Duck cartoons where they got their start. Them being well-meaning but slightly mischievous kids with a penchant for Junior Woodchuck protocol, and they also all had the exact same voice.
We took it! We gave you our lucky quarter instead! Yeah! We won 6 rounds of Donkey Kong with it!
The new series gave them more distinct personalities, designs, voices and personalities, which was far better in my opinion. The original 3 were fine, but they were rather dull and occasionally a bit annoying, especially when the 90s came around. Huey was made to be more matured and uptight, and is the one of the 3 who takes the Junior Woodchuck's lifestyle, which fits his character the best. Dewey was made to be more adventurous, and his running character arc to try and find out what happened to their mother, Della Duck, who was never mentioned in the original series, though her inclusion in the newer series was a stroke of genius for both character development for Dewey and a great mystery. And Louie was made to be a more nonchalant shyster who shares his great uncle's avarice and selfishness. Donald was barely in the original series, appearing only in the first episode and a few more in the first series, and the reason is that he was drafted off to join the Navy, which is why he left the boys with Scrooge in the first place, as opposed to needing a sitter for the day because he was going for a job interview like in the new series. Though he was a lot more of a vital part in the comics, going on adventures just as much as Scrooge did, which is what the new series seems to be wanting to emulate, though they still never explain why his voice is different from all the other ducks in the series. Maybe all of those years of secondhand smoke from making his nephew smoke cigars finally caught up with him. Mrs. Beakley and Webby are drastically different from the original series, with Beakley being a more of a fragile but capable elderly housemaid who Scrooge hired in the first series to help keep an eye on the boys and also help clean up the house, and Webby was mostly just an innocent and quote-unquote girly character.
What do you think, Grammy? It's Huey, Dewey, and Louie.
It's very, colorful, dear. Why don't you show it to the boys?
Oh, they'd make fun.
Which was intended to make the show appeal more to a female demographic, which was a common trend of cartoons at the time. Webby's gimmick was that she continually wanted to be brought along on adventures, but Scrooge and the boys always argued against it, but somehow she would find a way and often cause trouble, and then find a solution to the problems that they faced. The updated versions were much better, with Beakley being a badass former secret agent whom Scrooge hired as his housemaid after they both retired from agent work, and is also British now for some reason.
A week's provisions, an experimental deep-sea sub,
and 1 secretary for an old man who seems to have forgotten that I am not his secretary!
And Webby is a socially awkward, Scrooge-obsessed fangirl and adrenaline junkie who, while still having a craving for adventure, is much more capable of handling it, and the boys are much more accepting of her and become her first friends she ever has.
Are we friends now?
If we say yes, will you let us live?
She's also compared a lot to Mabel from Gravity Falls, though I've never seen Gravity Falls myself, so I'll just take people's opinion on that. Though I get the feeling that the opinion that's going to be in the comments section after this video is how I suck for not watching Gravity Falls. Scrooge is very similar to his 80s counterpart and his comic origins, though Alan Young's Scrooge was a bit more curmudgeon-y and grumpy.
Penny for the poor.
They're not worth it. Money will get you through times of no luck, my boy. Better than luck will get you through times of no money.
And David Tennant has more of an ego and drive to prove himself better than anyone else in his respective series.
that bauble. It's nice, but it's obviously super cursed.
All 3 Scrooges are nearly indistinguishable from each other, though I still argue that Peter Capaldi would have been a better choice than the purple sexual assaultist. Tennant's voice is just too distinct, you can tell it's him straight away once you hear it.
You've got to work smarter, lad, not harder.
Kiss my sweaty balls, you fat fuck.
Flintheart, on the other hand, is a lot more different than both of his other incarnations. In the comics, while originally hailing from Scotland, he spent most of his adult life in South Africa in a mining operation, and thus had the accent to go along with it. Though when it came time to do a cartoon based around Scrooge in the mid-80s, naturally the studio avoided a South African accent due to the various political and social upheavals going on in the country at the time, and also it would have made the scene where Ma Beagle sells him an apple full of awkward subtext.
You can't sell apples here.
Each apple only brings me 2 cents profit.
Profit? Give me 50% of your profits and toss in a free apple and you can stay.
However, both versions of the comic and the 80s show were basically the same personality, a more hard-headed, cruel version of Scrooge who will try any underhanded tactic that Scrooge wouldn't use to try and usurp him. Though his original and 80s cartoon, he's a lot more sinister and serious, whereas in the newer series they made him into more of an obnoxious joke.
Glom, gold, glom, gold, glom! Fine, enough glad handing.
Which, personally, I'm not a fan of, and a massive missed opportunity to either have Capaldi, Frankie Boyle, Fred McCauley, or even Billy Connolly in the show.
This country is in a terrible state according to some people, and I know why. It's because the national anthem is boring.
I'm all for funny villains in a kids show, but with the exception of Magica De Spell, he's quite possibly the most vile character in the original series, doing things that even Frollo would find detestable. But with reboots, you win some and you lose some. Oh, and a little factoid here, which technically doesn't have anything to do with either of the shows, but I'll never get another chance to say this anywhere else. In the DuckTales Remastered video game from 2013, he was actually voiced by Brian George, who was also Raj's dad in The Big Bang Theory.
Oh, shut your beak. You're not getting any younger yourself, you old windbag. It's been great doing business with you, Scroogey.
Oh, and speaking of which, Magica De Spell was also changed quite a bit too. In the original, she never had a niece and was never cursed, though ironically she did once fight her own shadow in the original show, which gave a whole new meaning to the term Shadow War.
Like I am missing a hole in the head.
She was a constant threat to Scrooge by concocting plans and spells to steal his #1 dime, which would explain that she wanted to get it because she wanted to turn it into a pendant, which would give her all the luck and money in the world via a Midas touch, aka turning everything into gold just by touching it, and allow her to take over the world. Not the most flawless plan in the world, but there are worse ways to take over the world.
Tonight we shall use the power of static electricity to conquer the world. Static will entrap the world in its own garments.
She was also Russian and had her voice provided to her by voice acting legend June Foray.
So, you have come at last, Scrooge McDuck. And you brought a bad luck charm too.
Who also voiced Ma Beagle and Scrooge's mother.
That dime isn't worth 10 cents here in Scotland. You'll have to go to America to spend it. A lousy dime. I used the best dynamite stolen money can buy for a lousy dime!
She was also the voice of Natasha and Rocky and Bullwinkle, Granny and Witch Hazel in the Looney Tunes show, and made several other appearances in Disney cartoons like Gummy Bears and Darkwing Duck. In the new series, she was made to be a bit more sinister, but also a bit more jokey, now sporting a British accent provided by former David Tennant co-star in Doctor Who, Catherine Tate, quite fittingly enough, who does an amazing job.
You wait here while the Hunter's Stone searches for Scrooge's dime. It will bring the dime to you. You will bring the dime to me. And I will unleash its secret mysterious power, striking from within his very home and laying my grim vengeance upon Scrooge McDuck.
This time her main goal through most of the series is to be released from her imprisonment, which was revealed to be a netherworld inside Scrooge's dime. Based on a comic book about a really rich duck, ladies and gentlemen. Her magic is also a lot more powerful than it was before, whereas in the 80s series she had to rely a lot on tricks and misdirection. Here, when she's released, she's powerful enough to pretty much take over Duckburg with just a few hand movements. This new version could put Maleficent to shame. Also, Magica's spells in the original were not as disgustingly hardcore looking and disturbingly creepy as in the new series. And despite Magica's more comedic approach, unlike Glomgold, it actually works perfectly for her, since she mixes her comic attitude with a very dark humour and grim motives, combined with the horrendous act of keeping her niece Lena subjugated to do her will at the expense of her uneasy friendship with Webby, who is a great character in her own right.
This is a party? All the best parties are at burnt-out junkyards.
Who it actually turns out is a magical shadow puppet that she calls her niece, and is then made a part of Webby's shadow through the power of friendship. And I thought Forgotten Toys was a weird show. Speaking of Big Bad Ma Beagle,
the meanest cat from old Chicago town,
and the Beagle Boys, they're also pretty much spot on from their previous incarnations too.
My boy!
heart to see all of you here together as a family.
Though Ma Beagle seems to have some kind of rabbit gene in her since she's got hundreds of kids now, and is also a lot more harsh to her kids than in the original. Though the fact that they hate Scrooge is still present, and that they have more of a passing resemblance to the Dalton brothers and their mother from the Lucky Luke comics. Seriously, am I the only one who's noticed that resemblance?
You always steal such pretty things. Oh, you're such a good boy.
I guess they busted out to be at their mama's wedding. Oh, they always were such thoughtful children. She taught her four sons.
And to round off the reoccurring villains, naturally, Mark Beeks is a brand new villain who is made to appeal more to modern kids seemingly, though does seem to have more of a comparison to John D. Rockaduck from the comics, and also seems to be a spoof of modern millionaires like Bill Gates, Steve Jobs and Mark Zuckerberg. And while a good concept, he is a tad annoying and not much of a genuine threat, just spouting off millennial catchphrases and seemingly trying to appeal to a modern kid audience on an almost insulting level.
Remix!
Though his interactions with Gizmo Duck are some of his best moments. Launchpad is also very on point as well, though while having a slightly more naive personality, is still the happy-go-lucky crash magnet that he was in the original, which is great to see.
Don't worry, Mr. McD. If it's got wings, I can crash it.
I hope my medical insurance is paid up.
Though we've yet to see a return fire reference to Scott Pilgrim vs. the World because of the reference they made to him. The theme song was kept exactly the same in terms of lyrics, but was given more of a thematic and dramatic orchestration than in the original.
Life is like a hurricane here in Duckburg. Race cars, lasers, airplanes. It's a Duckburg. Might solve a mystery or rewrite history. Ducktales. Woo. Every day they're out there making Ducktales. Woo.
Plus the graphics in the intro call more towards the original Carl Barks comics that spawned the franchise in the first place rather than the original intro, though it's still a theme that is impossible not to groove to when you hear it. The animation in the first series is mostly what you'd expect. Disney had only really started experimenting with TV animation at this point in their history, since they always thought that TV animation was too cheap and didn't give enough of a yield to be worth it. But then Eisner came in and switched that around. As such, it's obviously not on par with the stuff that you would have seen in their movies at the time, but it's still a lot better than other 80s cartoon animation like He-Man and G.I. Joe, and it's still very fluent, colourful, and has a great amount of personality to it. The newest series has gone for a more stylised, modern look to it, like most of Disney's modern cartoons are, and the best way to describe it is that it's a mix between late 60s pop art, modern comic books, and a tiny bit of anime in there with the big eyes, and it definitely helps give the show its own identity in comparisons to other things Disney has done. Oh, and on that note, I'm sure someone will mention it, there have been some actual comic tie-ins for the new series, though I've not read them yet. I still need to catch up on all those French comics that Jeffrey introduced me to. The writing is also a lot more modern, not that the original was dated at all, in fact it made itself seem very timeless and generalised to get in as much of a wide audience as it possibly could, though this did lead to some rather tedious elements such as Webby and certain episodes that seemed geared towards getting in as much of a younger audience as they could. Plus they generally aimed to be more about fun and games and never went for the feels that the newer series had, which is fine, but it did make the show seem a bit dull sometimes. So the new show seems to have counteracted that with lots of modern humour, mixed in with some great drama and a sense of self-awareness that makes it very endearing. Though occasionally in the attempt to have as many jokes as possible, they put in some jokes that are just painful to watch or listen to.
Pretty darling, oh there you are. Oh thank you gents. My sister and I will be certain to tell our dearest Mama Beagle of the gracious hospitality we've received here in the colonies.
Though admittedly compared to the drama in the last few episodes, I can forgive it for that. Shit got real near the end. Gyro Gearloose has definitely changed a lot since the 80s. He was previously more of a good-natured bumbling inventor with a skill for making gadgets, but would often not work.
I call her the Golden Condor, cause she'll soar through the Andes like a mountain bird.
Here, he's more of a Sheldon Cooper kind of character, with a serious inferiority complex, an arrogant and jerky personality, and much more unforgiving and kind than his predecessor.
Shut up, everyone! I've done something brilliant!
I'm sorry,
but apology accepted. Now try to keep up with my mind-numbing genius.
He also never took an intern who was a horse with a statue head of Scrooge McDuck on it, but that's pretty funny either way.
Look out! It's a headless man or
course, he broke in to hoop us all to death.
What? Don't be dumb. I'm just trying out some new interns.
Also, Fenton was not his intern, he was Scrooge's bookkeeper, who just so happened to become Gizmo Duck because the armour activated because his catchphrase was the exact same as the suit's activation code. Quite a convenience, I know. And he didn't take the role of a superhero quite as well since it was jumped onto him by surprise. Also, his mama was more of a stay-at-home middle-aged woman as opposed to the hard-hitting cop she is in the new series, though they kept the love for soap operas in there. Also, there's no references to the Crackshell family being from Mexico in the original, but it's a nice addition to the new series' incarnation of the characters, and furthering Disney's great representation of Hispanics in their new movies and shows. Good on you, Disney. The Terra Firmians were also a lot more outwardly aggressive in the comics than the 80s series. Gladstone Gander is also very close to his previous incarnation, but with a bit more of a modern design to him as opposed to his Goldilocks curls he had in the comics, and with less of a Rob Paulson-y voice than he had in the original series.
Why on earth would you treat the richest man in the world to breakfast?
Well, it's simple, Unc. To sell you this gold money clip that I won in a raffle. I need to pay my rent.
Though he's slightly more aware of his own luck and its downsides in the newer series.
I'm sorry, Don. I really am. But I literally just can't lose.
There were never any references to My Little Pony in the previous series, quite thankfully.
Greetings! We're Briar and Bramble, the keepers of this realm.
Goldie Old Guilt is very similar from her original incarnation, though her excuses for screwing Scrooge over in the original were not just "you're Scrooge McDuck." Darkwing Duck was not a TV series in the Ducktales world. It was actually its own TV series that took place within the same universe, and Launchpad was even Darkwing's sidekick.
Quick, LP, create a diversion.
How about dying from exhaustion?
That's too subtle.
I'd also argue that the Darkwing Duck theme was even better than the DuckTales theme song.
Somewhere some villain schemes, but his number's up 3, 2, 1. Darkwing Duck.
So that kind of screws over any chance of a future crossover, though it was nice to bring back the original voice actor for Darkwing.
I am the terror that flaps in the night. I am the lone roller skate at the base of villainy staircase. I am Darkwing Duck. Playtime's over. And I gotta get a shorter intro.
No matter what, you can't beat Jim Cummings. Tragically, the episode that the new series made around Christmas time was not their version of A Christmas Carol, which Disney's first adaptation of said story was actually Alan Young's debut as Scrooge back in 1983.
My partner, Jacob Marley, dead 7 years today. In his will, he left me enough money to pay for his tombstone. And I had him buried at sea. And has also become a yearly tradition for me to watch, and I would love to have seen a version with the new characters, though either way it's still preferable to Jim Carrey. I'm also curious if this series will lead to a movie like the previous one did, if only so we can bring back Murloc, Genie... No, not that one, and Dijon. Duckworth was never a ghost in the original. In fact, he never died at all. He had been in Scrooge's service long before the series started, and was the only member of staff and occupant in his house a long time before the boys arrived. Believe it or not, the magic juice from the episode The Confidential Case Files of Agent 22 and its creators are actual references to another Disney cartoon show, Gummy Bears, which was the first cartoon show made for the Disney afternoon, which was the same block of cartoons that DuckTales and Darkwing Duck got their premiere on. The series itself was set in a fantasy world where the gummy bears were protectors of a forest and used, quote, gummy berry juice to give themselves incredible strength and elasticity to fight the evil Duke, and apparently was commissioned because then head of Disney, Michael Eisner, insisted that they make a show about the gummy bear sweets because how much his son loved eating them, which surprises me because compared to the Haribo versions, American gummy bears taste disgusting. This is sort of a microcosm of the best and worst parts of Michael Eisner's time as the head of Disney, though let's not go on a tangent about that for now. There's actually a lot of references to Webby's original incarnation all throughout the show in the form of a frequently abused doll that looks like exactly how she used to look, showing how much the new showrunners felt about her previous incarnation, and how therapeutic it is to see that little brat get eviscerated. Scrooge was actually not as closed off in the original series, but he very rarely helped out with Duckburg's economy or development, nor was it stated that he owned the land it was built on. Then again, that piggy mare never seems to show up in the new
new series, so perhaps he's also the mayor in the new series as well. Scrooge has not gone as much into his origin story in greater detail yet, apart from his shoe shining days, nor has Donald been seen doing as much of his comedic shtick as much. So regular characters from the original series like Soapy Slick, Uncle Catfish, Daisy Duck, or Goofy and Mickey have not been seen anywhere yet. Then again, some of those characters never appeared in the original series to begin with. They were probably too busy fighting Final Fantasy characters. Ludwig von Drake was actually not a member of the Secret Service. In fact, he's quite an old Disney character who almost predates Scrooge himself and was frequently used as a character for educational films on the Disney Channel or as an inventor character when Gyro wasn't available.
This whole program is being seen in color. Huh, and that's a lie. You know that's a lie, because only the people with color TV sets is seeing it in color.
He was also an uncle of Donald, which just makes me think of how complicated the Duck family tree must be, and how many are actually direct descendants in this family. There are more uncles, cousins, and nephews in this family than that family tree from the intro of Idiocracy. Also, ironically enough, the agency Shush actually comes from Darkwing Duck, who would often brief Darkwing with missions, and was the antithesis to the criminal organization FOUL, which was also referenced in the new series. And yes, they are meant to be spoofs of the Marvel agency S.H.I.E.L.D. But thankfully we never got a Disney Agents of Shush series out of that. The overtly supernatural elements were not as prominent in the original series as you might think. There were parts in episodes involving Magica, Murloc and a few others, but the focus was more on treasure hunting and archaeology. They were a bit more prevalent in the comics alongside some sci-fi elements with physics-altering gadgets and aliens, but the 2017 show really engorged it, which has led to some fantastic jokes and stories. Don Carnage actually comes from the series Tailspin, which was about Baloo from the Jungle Book running a cargo plane business and continually being hassled by the sky pirates that Carnage leads. Yes, this was an actual show that was shown on the Disney Afternoon as well, and it was pretty good too, and probably the best part of it besides Carnage is seeing Shere Khan in a bloody suit and voiced by the great Tony J.
And I've discovered that business is like a jungle. There are the eaters, and there are the eatens.
They also reference Cape Suzette, the place that the series took place in the final episode. They probably left out Baloo, Shere Khan and Louie because it would have been confusing seeing him in that context given how popular the Jungle Book remake was a few years ago. Though then again it was confusing when the original Tailspin series came out in the 80s. Sadly, this version of Don Carnage is nowhere near as funny as the version from Tailspin.
Even though your flybys were out of sync, the harmonies were all off, and someone was late!
You have made Don Carnage, which is me, very unhappy.
Also, I don't remember him having a crew member with the same voice actor as Scrooge.
But we got the treasure, Captain, and isn't that what really matters?
You see what I mean with his voice being too distinct? You can immediately tell that's him even when he's trying to sound different.
May I give you some pointers on your pirouette?
Or maybe it was just a reference to Alan Young also being in Monkey Island.
We're a pack of scurvy sea dogs! Have we pity, not a dram?
We all eat roasted garlic.
Then sing from the diaphragm.
A pirate I was meant to be. Trim the sails and roam the sea.
Guess the song's over then. Guess so.
So we've got Darkwing Duck, Gummy Bears and Tailspin down. When are we going to see a cameo from Chip and Dale's Rescue Rangers or Duckula, eh? He was in the video game even if it was under a different name.
Dracula Duck!
Scrooge confirmed that his parents had died by the time the series had started in the original.
Without me parents, I felt poorer than ever.
So no immortality curses in the old series, making it so that they were still around. Though I give credit to Graham McTavish, he did do a great job as Fergus. Even though it's hard to beat the fact that the original was done by the voice of both Scooby-Doo and Papa Smurf.
You deserve better. I want you to work smarter, not harder, lad.
Plus, Scrooge never calls him McPapa in this version, so instant loss of points there. Though it's gained back by how they explained that Fergus secretly gave Scrooge his dime, which is actually straight from the comics and wasn't in the original series. Good on you there. To my knowledge, a famous black actor did not voice Donald Duck in the 80s, though I would have loved to have seen that back then. Maybe get in Eddie Murphy or something, that would have been awesome.
Yeah, I was wondering how much something like this went for. $130,000. Get the fuck out of here! No, I cannot, it's serious!
Though either way, it was super surreal to hear Cheadle's voice come out of Donald's mouth, though why his personality changes is never actually made clear.
Get ready for the storm.
I am the storm.
No, seriously, have you been saying things like that this whole time?
Also, it seems that based off the last shot of the final episode that we'll be going to the moon in the next series. And you know what that means for DuckTales.
Ooh, crazy duck in space.
Of course, there's going to be many more changes like this in the future, but you know what? I welcome them. This series has been fantastic for the franchise and Disney in general, and shows that a reboot can be its own entity while still paying loving tribute to the original, and using materials from previous incarnations and using it in the modern version without just being a blind reference like the 2012 Ninja Turtles series has done. Although it seems that Nickelodeon is feeling the pinch, so they released this new series to compete with DuckTales, which is annoying. Either keep going with the series you already had, or come up with something completely new. Though then again, that didn't really work for Cartoon Network. I want to see more reboots done like this in the future, and last year I did an entire list of shows I thought should be rebooted, so if you want to hear more about that, go and check out that video. But all I'll say for now is that I'm looking forward to seeing this series continue on, and just hope it doesn't get too ahead of itself. But I've had enough of this. I'm going on the other side to have a bath. Bye!